The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A big topic for us in 2019 so far has been the growing threat from the anti-vaccine community, not just in the United States, but in a lot of different parts of the world. I mentioned early on in the year that anti-vaccine sentiment has been listed by the World Health Organization as one of the top 10 global health threats of the year. Canada is getting really serious about this issue, and I absolutely love it. They've sent out 6,000 suspension notices to parents of children in the Waterloo region, which is in the province of Ontario. And the notices say that the school department doesn't have proof of vaccination or valid exemption requests for these roughly 6,100 kids. Now, this is not all anti-vaccine sentiment, and I'll explain what's going on. With a lot of these kids, it's just a matter of getting the vaccination records to the public health officials. With some of these kids, they are not vaccinated, and the parents are going to have to make a decision about whether they are going to have their kids vaccinated by March 26th, whether they are going to pull them out of public school and send them to private school, if that's something that they can afford and are interested in doing, if they're going to request an exemption from vaccination, or if the kids are going to end up suspended potentially for 20 days from school. And there's a really interesting dynamic here, because a lot of people emailed me and then they said, hold on, David, I'm reading this story, but schools have required vaccination records in Canada for a really long time. Why is this happening all of a sudden? And it's really interesting. A lot of the school districts that require vaccination records didn't really pursue the records because everybody was vaccinated, or almost everybody was vaccinated. There was no problem with the anti-vaccine movement. The anti-vaccine movement is now growing. So nothing has changed in terms of requiring vaccination records. What's changed is that now the schools are getting stricter about actually requesting those records. And what's also important just to remind everybody about here is that vaccinations are not mandatory in the sense that the government is forcing people to vaccinate themselves or their children. Canada isn't forcing anybody to get a vaccine. Canada, or better said, Waterloo, Ontario, is saying, if you want your kids to go to public school, you either need to give us a vaccination record or a valid waiver from vaccination. It's all up to the parents. The parents can say, I'm in a homeschool. The parents can say, I'm going to send them to a private school. The parents can say, I'm going to try to get an exemption from vaccination. And parents who have vaccinated their kids should be really glad that this is being done, because you want a system that's going to shake out the anti-vaxxers who might be endangering their kids. Of course, no vaccine is 100% effective. Herd immunity is the name of the game. You have kids who are immunocompromised who can't be vaccinated. You have kids who are doing the right thing and getting vaccinated. Their parents are doing the right thing. But because the vaccine's not 100%, everybody who opts merely not to vaccinate because they don't want to is putting everybody at risk. And what you really need to understand here is that there are centuries of medical progress, with vaccines as one of the greatest contributors to that progress. That progress is being threatened by people who just don't want to vaccinate their kids. Religious exemptions should not be allowed, period. Send your kid to a private school. Homeschool them. Don't use religion as a tool to endanger a publicly funded government-run school system. It just can't be allowed to happen. And meanwhile, it's not just in Canada that this is a problem. The anti-vaccine movement is exploding. I have so many stories I've been hoping to get to about this. We learned about a father whose family is the epicenter of the Vancouver, Canada measles outbreak. His name is Emmanuel Bilodeau. He says the reason he didn't vaccinate his kids is he was afraid that the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, would give them autism. Japan is having a measles outbreak. There's a religious group called Kyusei Shinkyo, which operates in the Mie prefecture. That's the center of a measles outbreak. They are now apologizing for the outbreak. They are known to spread anti-vaccine nonsense. They're saying they're not going to do it anymore. And then, by the way, Madagascar is now dealing with almost 70,000 reported cases of measles, and the connection to the anti-vaccine sentiment in Madagascar is still being explored. We don't know to what extent it's connected. So it's getting really bad. Parts of the United States, Washington State, and Oregon are epicenters in the U.S. Canada, Australia, we've talked about. A number of countries in Europe, including Italy and one other that I'm forgetting. Japan now dealing with this. Madagascar now dealing with this. And there are people who sort of laugh at this and say, David, it's Darwinian selection. Anybody who doesn't get vaccinated is going to be less likely to live long enough to pass on their genes to children, and you'll just sort of have anti-vaxxers die off. Not true, because unfortunately, much of the risk around not vaccinating people is around people who can't get vaccines. The vaccines are not 100% effective, so it's not just Darwinian selection that we can all laugh at. This is a serious health issue, and that's why the WHO has designated it as such for 2019. Remember all of the promises that Donald Trump made about GDP? GDP was going to be so much better than under Barack Obama. Trump promised 3, 4, 5, even 6% yearly GDP growth was floated by Donald Trump and by his cronies. We now have the 2018 number, and it's fallen short of even 3% growth. 2018 GDP growth was 2.9%. This decline in GDP growth is expected to continue for the rest of Donald Trump's term. Economists have been telling Trump baby boomer retirement is going to impact GDP growth. Productivity issues are going to impact GDP growth. There's a long list of issues that are going to impact GDP growth. And Donald Trump said, nah, we're going to get 5% or we're going to get maybe even 6%. Now, the truth is, there's a few issues here which we just all need to be honest about. I'm not going to play games with these GDP numbers. Number one, 2.9% growth is pretty reasonable for the 21st century. It's not a particularly bad number. It's just that Trump was promising things to his supporters that were completely and utterly unrealistic. That's number one. Number two, this isn't the only year where Trump has failed to meet his own expectations, his own promises on GDP growth. 2017's number was just 2.2%. Okay, so that's number one. But there's a sort of bigger ultimate truth that we have to recognize here. Yes, Barack Obama was better on jobs. Yes, Barack Obama was better on growth and on the issue of debt and deficit, which many people don't even actually care about. It's just a political football. Barack Obama was better on all of those things. But there's a bigger discussion here, which we've been having more and more on the David Pakman Show, which is that the expectation of indefinite, endless, accelerating growth is not sustainable. It's not sustainable from the perspective of climate change and the environment and pollution and the impact that it's having on the earth. It's not sustainable in terms of the inequality that this endless pursuit of indefinite growth has had on American society and on so many other societies. Lack of access to health care. Something has to give. So it's fun and it's funny to once again point out that Donald Trump was making expectations that he absolutely was never really in a position to make. Donald Trump has not achieved those things. Barack Obama was better on all of these issues. It's funny, and there's the kind of partisan political element of it, of dumb Trump and his followers who believe anything he says. But bigger picture, this issue of expecting indefinite growth on a planet of limited resources and that is increasingly hurt and damaged by the uncontrolled forms of capitalism that we have, that's the more serious conversation. Presidential candidates don't want to have that conversation with you, the same way that they don't want to have the conversation with you about technological automation, because they will be framed as defeatists. But it's the actual conversation that we need to have. Who's going to actually have the strength to talk about it in a serious way on the presidential stage? I don't know if anybody's going to. It's certainly not going to be Trump, that's for sure. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we have a really, really good Friday show for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is James Ptasik. I think the P and maybe a Z are silent. I really apologize, James, but you are today's new member of the day. Mike Robinson, that one I feel much more confident with. Mike Robinson is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon codes are available for those who want them, for those who need them. This is 2020 will save you 40% off of the membership of your choice. Let's go to the phones at 617-830-4750. Our first caller today is from the 915 area code. Caller from 915. Who's there? What's on your mind today?
Yes, so my question is...
Okay, so hold on a second. We can barely hear you. Sounds like you're underwater, but what's your name? Where are you calling from?
I'm from El Paso, Texas.
Okay, what's your name?
Kevin.
Kevin, all right. What's on your mind, Kevin?
I'm asking... I'm a new follower of your show, and I've been watching the videos. I have a question on the 2020 election.
Sure.
Right now, Bernie is leading in the Democratic Party, but
what poll are you?
Hold
on a second. Where you've seen a poll that says Bernie's in the lead? The ones I see have Joe Biden in the lead, even though he hasn't declared yet. Which poll are you looking at?
Well, based on the ones that are officially running yet, he's the number one, right? He already made $10 million of donations.
Oh, you're saying in donations he's leading, not in the polls.
Yes. I'm sorry. Do you think Biden or the DNC will rig against Bernie Sanders when Biden will start running?
Sorry, you're saying, do I think that if Joe Biden announces that the DNC will rig it for Joe Biden?
Yeah, kind of like 2016 with Hillary Clinton.
I mean, I'm worried about it. Yeah, so there were people a couple weeks ago who called in and said that the DNC has already decided Kamala Harris is their nominee and that they're going to work to make her the nominee. And at the time I said, it's possible. I'm not seeing evidence of that necessarily yet. And I actually think her campaign has sort of been not doing so well since I got that phone call. Joe Biden, as I mentioned, is already leading in polls, even though he hasn't announced. And I think that if anyone was going to cause the DNC to say, we are now going to get involved in a partisan way, it very well could be Joe Biden who causes them to do that. Sure.
Okay, yeah, because that's the only thing that I'm worried about this election, because I don't think Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump.
Why not?
Because even though polls say Donald Trump's approval rating is low, I think it's high. And I think even after the State of the Union speech, it went even higher. And,
so you just don't, are you saying you just don't believe what the public approval polls say about, like you just think they're wrong, the numbers are wrong?
Yeah, because I was at the Trump rally in El Paso. I went to the Beto rally to against the Trump rally, and it was a sea of people. Now, El Paso is mostly Democratic. They vote Democrat mostly. So
yeah, but listen, I mean, you can get, in almost anywhere in the U.S., you can get 6,500 people who support the president to meet up. Listen, I think what you're bringing up is interesting. I hope the DNC doesn't rig it. We're going to be following it. I appreciate the call, and I've got a bunch of other people who want to get in here, so I'm going to let you go. Let's go next to our caller from the 240 area code. Caller from 240, who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. My name is Matt. I'm calling from Maryland.
All right, Matt.
So I'm an economics major, and I support progressively higher income taxes on the extremely wealthy. And I've been talking to my father, who is more what you call a corporate Democrat.
Okay.
And he does support these extremely high taxes on the wealthy. He points to papers and studies that say if you increase taxes on them, they'll find even more ways to pay even less taxes. So I just want to know what your opinion is on that.
Well, that's if they are allowed to do that. I mean, people will. Okay, so listen. In general, people are going to, there's a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance means using legal means to reduce your tax liability. Tax evasion is when we typically talk about criminal activity, criminal tax evasion. If you raise a tax rate on paper and then add some kind of loophole or say that only applies to wages, but you can reclassify your income in this other way and not pay taxes on it. Of course, anybody with the resources to avail themselves of accounting advice is going to do that. And that actually, that's not a secret, right? And I even pointed out when people say a 90% top marginal rate is something we did in the past. When we had it in the past, it was at a time when there were so many deductions and exempt income that high rate applied to a tiny, tiny fraction of anyone's income. So it wasn't really effective. It wasn't an effective rate in any kind of serious way. So sure, I mean, your dad's right. People will try not to pay taxes if they can avoid it legally. But that's why we have to look at the capital gains tax. That's why we have to look at offshoring of money and repatriation and all of this other stuff. I mean, your dad's not wrong, but that's not a reason to say that the science around a 70% top marginal rate as being the rate that maximizes government revenue, that science is still sound.
Yeah, I agree. I think the IRS has so many resources to go after people that if they really wanted to, they could definitely go after the very wealthy that want to put their money overseas. And
yeah, but again, it's not about the IRS having the resources to go after people. Go after implies they've already broken some kind of law. The point is we have to determine what the law is. If you say 70% marginal tax rate, but it's 15% on capital gains, CEOs can say, hey, I'll just take $1 salary and pay me just in distributions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So I don't know if it's really a question. I just want to know what your opinion is on the U.S.'s hypocrisy on Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Marco Rubio is right now in Venezuela saying that he wants to bring democracy to them and all this, which I support. I think they need to be. The situation there is absolutely disgusting, and there needs to be some regime change there. But the U.S. is completely silent on all the authoritarian bullcrap that Saudi Arabia does to its own citizens. So I just want to know.
Listen, I'm against our relationship with Saudi Arabia, but you say you want to bring regime change to Venezuela. I'm against that. Can you give me an example of the U.S. bringing regime change in Latin America that has gone well? No, hold on a second. Whoa, hold on a second. And I don't know if we're now on speaker, but your connection's quickly deteriorating. My question was going to be, is there an example you can point to of the U.S. bringing democracy and regime change to Latin America that has worked out well?
No, I don't support the U.S. bringing regime change. I think the people there need to. I really don't know if there's a solution other than a civil war or Maduro finally realizes that he's a horrible human being, which I don't think will happen.
Oh, okay. No, then we're on the same page. Yeah, I mean, Maduro needs to go, and there needs to be regime change, but it can't be crafted think tank regime change coming from the United States. All right, we really appreciate the call. Great to hear from you. Wish your connection had been a bit better. Let's go to our next caller from the 719 area code. Who's calling from 719 today?
This is Ryan from Colorado Springs.
All right. And Ryan, we're not on Bluetooth or speaker, right?
Correct.
Excellent.
I wanted to know your thoughts on Andrew Yang's chances of getting it far through the Democratic primary. I know that you've expressed sort of an interest. I know you didn't express total support of him yet, but I know that you were kind of interested in it. And I just wanted to see what you thought of his chances.
So listen, he's got an uphill battle, but you've got to take it in steps. Here's how I'm sort of thinking about Andrew Yang's candidacy. Number one, in February of the year before the election, the front runners rarely end up being the nominees. That's number one. So any argument that says Andrew Yang has no chance because he's not leading right now, I don't think is a very good argument. So once we step back from that, the next question is, what's the big test? The big test is, can you raise money and can you get into the debates? Andrew Yang says that he has been told by the DNC that he is eligible to be in the debates. He needs to get these 65,000 donations. I think he's more than halfway there, so he's well on his way. So, the math of it is, if he gets into the debates, if he can get a couple percent in Iowa, if there's a 12-way field, that gets him an okay enough position to raise more money and to get into the second primary. So I think that we can't assess his chances of being the nominee right now. We can only assess his chances of making it all the way to the Iowa caucuses and doing okay. And I think that he's actually identified what the path is to do that.
Okay.
All right. Very good.
Yeah,
Thank you. Appreciate the call. Good question. And we're going to have Andrew back on sooner than later, I hope. Let's go to the 559 area code. Who's calling today from 559?
Hey, David, it's Adam from Fresno. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Adam. What's going on?
Perfect. So I was wondering, in relation to Bernie Sanders, his Wall Street speculation tax.
Mm-hmm.
When I bring this up to other conservatives about when it comes to free college, they say that would slow down the economy. I'm not too sure they're correct about that.
Hold on, Adam.
Is that true?
Are they saying a financial transaction tax would slow the economy, or that free college would slow the economy?
The Wall Street speculation tax.
Oh, okay. So the answer is basically no. I mean, here's what you have to explain to them, Adam. There are activities that are economically stimulative. And this would be like, for example, a local cobbler makes shoes, and then the shoes are sold, and then there's a product, and the cobbler has to buy their leather from someone else. And then when people buy the shoes, they're now able to walk to work where they make money, right? There's this idea of like a stimulative effect for the economy. That part, I'm guessing, makes sense. So a lot of these speculative financial tools that exist have been studied closely, and they have no positive stimulative effect on the economy, like just zero. They literally just generate money on paper, which is what money is, but they generate money from money in computers that is not economically stimulative. It's not money that then is available for loans or whatever. It's just a process of self-enrichment and speculation. So if you tax that, you're taxing an activity that is of no economic value, so it would not be any disaster for the economy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind next time.
Very good. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it. Great to hear from you. Let's see who else we've got here. What about our caller from the 513 area code? Who's there from 513 today?
Hey, David. It's Brandon from Fort Lauderdale.
Hey, Brandon. What's going on?
Hey, David. So I was calling in. I know you've dealt with this sort of question a few times, and it's going to be off the topic of politics, and it's going to be more towards the ethics of veganism. So I just wanted to challenge you a little bit.
Sure.
I don't know if you've heard of the name the trait argument, but the basic premise is, can you name a trait that is present in humans that if it were in animals, that it would be morally unacceptable to kill the animal in that case?
I've never thought about that, and I can think about it and get back to you. And obviously, it's a question that has been predetermined to get a particular response, which allows you to then make a particular claim. But I mean, here's my thing in general. I'm usually against any kind of universalist, black-white drawings of lines in the sand on almost every issue. So if the idea is to kind of foment a discussion or create a discussion where if such a trait cannot be named, therefore it is wrong to eat all animals or something like that. I mean, I just think that any of those sort of universalist type arguments are flawed systemically. So I don't know that whether I could or couldn't, it wouldn't really do much one way or the other for my view.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. So, thank you for the answer, by the way. The reason that I asked this is because I have yet to find a trait that would make it morally acceptable to kill an animal, whether it be intelligence, their level of sentience. Because if you say, well, the chicken has the same amount of intelligence as an animal, would I kill a human that has the same amount of intelligence as that chicken? Well, no, I obviously wouldn't do that. So
yeah, so listen, I mean, that's not an argument I would even engage in, so I don't know that it makes sense to argue it with me, but let me ask you this. Why is this name a trait thing, why do you find it so important, or why does it feel like it's powerful to you?
Because it's based off of what I think is most valuable in humans, which obviously is subjective, which is sentience, the ability to experience reality and to experience suffering and pain and well-being.
Okay. So like if there were plants that had some degree of sentience or animals that didn't, you'd be okay killing them?
Yeah, would I be okay with killing plants if they had sentience?
Yeah.
Great question. So it depends. Like, obviously, this is more, it depends how practical it is. Now,
well, I guess that would then be what gets me. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That then sort of gets back to the original thing, because first you made a very sort of black and white statement, like, for example, sentience would be the trait. But now you're saying that practicality does actually play a role. So maybe it's not so black and white to begin with.
Right. Well, you don't need to kill animals to get nutrition or anything like that. You need to eat plants, and you obviously will kill animals in the process of cropping plants.
Well, but hold on a second. Let's explore that, because hold on a second. You're saying you don't need to eat animals, but you need to eat plants. There are tribes that basically subsist on animal meat, animal blood, and animal milk. They don't need to do that any more than anyone needs to or doesn't need to eat plants, but they seem to be getting by without eating plants.
Right. Okay. So now, if they need to, if they don't have a way of growing crops or like gathering plants and berries and that sort of thing, and they need to kill animals, I would say they would be justified in that. Okay.
So then sentience is not really the black and white trait that you're saying is the most important consideration. There's other traits that are more important, like need, for example.
Exactly. It's based on necessity. Exactly.
Oh, so then what does sentience have to do with it?
Well, that's kind of the baseline. That's the baseline, and I just think since we live in a society to where that it's not needed for our nutrition or our health or anything like that, I see it as completely unnecessary to kill a sentient being for basically no reason other than taste pleasure.
So, like, scallops don't appear to be sentient. Are you okay with scallop eating?
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure they do have some sort of nervous system that they, I'm not sure with the scallops. I don't eat them just because I'm not a scallop eater. I don't find them to be tasty. But I mean, if
so
they're not
taste
sentient,
matters, actually. It sounds like you're saying in this case, you care more about the taste of scallops than their sentience.
No. If they are sentient, I wouldn't eat them.
Right, but if they're not, you're saying you don't like the taste.
Exactly. I wouldn't see it as morally wrong to eat them, though, if they're not sentient. Exactly.
All right. I appreciate it. I don't know that we're getting too much further, but it's a very, very interesting conversation. I'm glad you called in, and I'm going to let you go. I think most of the audience just gets so mad when vegan stuff comes up, and I think I might have indulged that longer than I should have. We're going to take a quick break. Don't hang up if you're holding, because we are taking more calls after the break. Stay on the phone line, 617-830-4750. We'll be back to the phones right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, let's go back to the phone lines at 617-830-4750. We will go to our caller from the 336 area code. Who's calling today from 336?
Hi, David. My name's Ricardo. 336. I'm from Winston-Salem, but I'm a university student in Charlotte, North Carolina.
All right, very good, Ricardo. What's on your mind today?
So I know you've been talking a lot about Venezuela recently, and I just want to touch back on the topic. So a lot of people on the left, even on left-wing YouTube channels like Secular Talk, Humanist Report, Rational National, they are argue for that the U.S. is backing a coup because, of course, they talk about Elliot Abrams and his horrible past, and many other things are the history of the United States, and also John Bolton's push for regime change in Iran, what he wishes to have. Mm-hmm. But I just want to ask you, how would you rebut the left wing's concern on a coup? Or they actually believe there will be a coup. That's what they believe in without the necessary evidence. And how would you also rebut Russian media? Because I've been watching reports from RT and Sputnik, and I don't really trust them. I just want to get a Russian perspective. But they're very the U.S. has had a coup without necessary evidence.
Okay, so I wouldn't even worry about rebutting Russian state media. I mean, there's a sort of triumvirate or a hydra that includes Russian interests in Syria, Russian interests in Venezuela, and Russian interests in meddling with American elections. And we know what they're doing. We know what their positions are. I mean, I'm no more interested in rebutting RT on the issue of Venezuela than I am on rebutting Venezuelan state media. Wow, I'm shocked. Venezuelan state media says Maduro's great and everything is, waterfalls and rainbows. I'm not super interested in that. I think the first thing you mentioned is more interesting. Now, I don't know what any of those shows you mentioned have said because I don't really watch anything. I just mostly read. So I think that anyone who is making the case that Elliot Abrams' involvement in Latin America is bad for Latin America is right. I agree with that. Anyone who is making the case that the United States should not be involved in deciding who is ultimately the president of Venezuela is right. I agree with that. Anyone who is making the case that the United States' involvement in Latin America has been a disaster for those countries and serves as evidence for opposing such involvement in Venezuela, I'm right there with them. And then I would say Maduro needs to go. Maduro is an authoritarian. The economy has been in free fall since before American sanctions were instituted, since before the decline of oil prices, which are the two sort of talking points that are most common from some people on the left. If it weren't for that decline in oil prices, if it weren't for American sanctions, the decline in Venezuela long predates that. Maduro has to go. There are too many similarities to Castro in Cuba, who I also believed was an authoritarian and undeniably is. And that's sort of where I am on it.
See, I agree with you a lot, but there's still a lot of people on left-wing channels. So I know you don't have the time to see left-wing channels, but what they're arguing is that since, of course, Elliot Abrams, in the guise of aid, he sent actually weapons to help, Contras in Nicaragua. They're arguing without necessary evidence that the U.S. aid that the United States is trying to transfer to Venezuela actually has weapons or something to lead a coup. But again, there's no evidence to that. But of course, many left-wing channels argue that without the evidence. And they also are, like you've already talked about, been criticizing Bernie, and I don't think they're really changing their position. So I don't know what, because a lot of people are really onto this, and I don't know how they change their opinion because I don't feel like they don't really care about the evidence on that.
Yeah, they don't care about the that's actually the problem. That there's a lot of people who it's unfortunately there's this sort of litmus test politics that is unfortunately happening I mean, it's been happening on the right for a long time, but it's also happening on the left where you're basically ostracized if you don't sort of toe the line when it comes to certain issues. And Venezuela has become one of those where there's very little room for sort of dissenting voices. They're immediately called neoliberal shills or whatever. And, you know, we sort of need a multi-layered thought when it comes to this. And I don't know that you're really going to change anyone's minds. I don't know that I would try to.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Really appreciate the call. Thank you. Let's go to, this is always a risk, but let's go to Ari, who's in the notes as obsessed with Iran and Russia. Ari, what's going on? What do you have for me today?
Hey, David, sorry about last time. I had some technical difficulties.
Oh, okay. I forgot about it already.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Okay, yeah. I know you're sick of this topic by now, but I just want to, everybody else talked about the Venezuela thing. I think you people have been a little bit too hard on you because you're obviously anti-regime change. The only thing is that when you talk about the left-wing apologetics as it pertains to Maduro, I got to be honest, I don't really see it that much in terms of the prominent voices. Now, I'm not talking about people on Twitter who apologize, who are apologists for Putin, Assad, and the rest of that ilk. But as far as even people like more progressive politicians like Ro Khanna, obviously the Sam Cedar crew, the secular talk, I see them clearly saying that Maduro is bad, but we should not be involved in regime change. And I think that when given the fact that you have people like John Bolton almost blatantly saying that we're basically, this is the reason why this matters to us is because of natural resources.
Yep.
The narrative emanating from the American context, I feel like, shouldn't be as much, well, here's a list of Maduro's crimes against humanity, but rather more, Maduro is bad, we oppose the authoritarian rule, but let's not get involved here because it hasn't worked out so well in the past. So I was curious
that's my position. So tell me where we disagree.
Well, I'm just saying, I think that, when you're talking about why people were criticizing Bernie, I think that it was more the optics of it. It's kind of playing into the hands of some of the perception was. It was
here's the problem. Here's my problem with that, Ari. That is where you go into an oppressive restriction on speech, because what you're basically saying, like, think about this for a second, Ari. You called me. You said, listen, the position of, I think you listed Kyle and the Majority Report people. You go, the Kyle and the Majority Report people say Maduro's bad and they're against regime change. David Pakman thinks Maduro's bad and he's against regime change. Ari, who's normally obsessed with Iran and Russia when he calls in, thinks Maduro's bad and he's against regime change. And Bernie said that Maduro's bad and he's against regime change. But Bernie saying it is dangerous because it plays into the neoliberal narrative of John Bolton who wants to take their oil. So you're basically saying Bernie shouldn't comment, or Bernie should say something that's not really his view. Either way is problematic.
It's not even. I mean, he can say whatever he wants. I mean, he should be able to say, we should implement regime change immediately.
No, but Ari, that's not my point. Here's my real specific point, and here's the question I have for you.
Yeah.
You've identified that you agree with me and with Bernie Sanders, and it sounds like with Sam Cedar and with Kyle Kulinski. Maduro's bad. We're against U.S.-led regime change. But you said you understand why it's problematic for Bernie to just say what he believes, which matches exactly what you believe. So what should Bernie do? Should Bernie not comment, or should he comment but say something that's not what he believes? Because the three options are Bernie says what he believes, Bernie says something he doesn't really believe, or Bernie keeps his mouth shut. Which one should Bernie do?
So first, I would say, just bear with me here. I would say that, first of all, I'm not 100% convinced that Bernie necessarily believes that. I think he's a politician and he's playing ball a little bit, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but I think that's my opinion.
I've seen no evidence that that's how Bernie Sanders operates. So unless you can present me evidence, I don't think that's how Bernie operates.
I mean, I think that's how all politicians operate personally. That is nothing to do about Bernie Sanders specifically. But I would say that what I would have wanted to see from a progressive progressive politician is more emphasis on the regime change aspect. That's all. It's not that I personally found his tweet to be fairly innocuous compared to benign compared to the other guys like secular talk. I think they were blowing it out of proportion. But there's a shred of it that I understand where they're coming from, just from the emphasizing that there is propaganda emanating from our side to implement regime change in a lot of different places. That's
all
really
right.
all
So
I'm
it sounds like basically Ari, me, and Bernie were all on the same page, but you think that the vocabulary Bernie used slightly overemphasized one thing and underemphasized a different thing in a way that you're not exactly in line with. But you basically agree with him and me.
That's right. We're all more or less on the same page, I think. But I think the way you say stuff matters. Obviously, I'm not trying to to restrict anybody's speech, but I'm saying that I think the way you present stuff does matter. As far as he's an influential guy, so I think he could have done a little bit better than that. But it's nothing that I feel like I think that it's horrible or anything like that. I think it was fairly benign. So that's all. That's all I'm getting to. But
all right. Okay, Ari. So it sounds like really everybody's doing mostly a good job, according to Ari. All right. Ari, great to hear from you. We will, I am sure, hear from you again. That does it for today. We will take calls again, and I really appreciate everybody calling in.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's get into audience questions for the week. 3 great ones for you. First one relates to the 2020 primary. Hey, David, yes, there are lots of Democratic candidates, but in the end, there can only be one. My question for you is, how quickly will we start to see candidates drop out? Well, we've already seen it. For example, former West Virginia State Senator Richard Ojeda, who we interviewed on the program, he's already out pointing out he just is not getting traction and he doesn't want people continuing to donate to a campaign that clearly is not going to get off the ground. So Richard Ojeda aside, there are these new requirements updated requirements for what it will take to make it onto the DNC, Democratic Organized Debates. And those requirements are 1% support in 3 national polls, 65,000 individual donors from at least 20 different states, and a minimum of 200 unique donors from each of those states. You can't have just 65,000 donors if in one state you only have like 10 donors. You've got to have at least 200 in each of those 20 states, but a total of 65,000. That may serve for some of the really not well-known candidates as a barrier to entry, but as we heard last week, Andrew Yang, who is one of the less well-known candidates on the Democratic side, has achieved that, and he is going to be participating. Some of these really unknown candidates, like who we've barely even been mentioning, my guess is they're not going to make that. And as a result, they will drop out probably before the debates even start. Then you will probably see after the first debate or two that there's going to be another sort of culling of everybody who's not getting at least like 3 or 4% support. And there you're going to see sort of another big thinning of the herd, so to speak. And then you're going to see as we get closer and closer to the convention that there will probably be only 3 to 4 candidates that are truly in the running. And there will be probably some question about what are superdelegates going to do? Will they maybe give the someone other than the front runner on the basis of early primaries a possible win? But it's going to be pretty clear by that point. So I would look for who doesn't even make it to the debates, and then who is out after the first probably 1 to 3 primaries before you get to that first major primary day. I think that the other thing to kind of consider is that you may see for non-polling, like non-support reasons, other candidates drop out. So there are already discussions about, there was this just scathing report about how Amy Klobuchar treats her staffers once making a show out of eating a salad with a comb because I guess they didn't bring her a fork, and then forcing them to go clean the comb. It's just all sorts of horrible stuff. It appears to be well-sourced article. Is that going to simply push her out under the guise of it becoming a, quote, distraction? I got a couple emails during the week saying David Cory Booker is getting no traction and he's going to be gone before you know it. So that may also happen. But I think the first big culling will be the debates and then the first couple of primaries, and then we will be going from there. David, everybody talks about neoliberalism. Can you talk about what that actually means? What does it mean to be neoliberal, and is it a smear? Okay, the second part is easier to answer. People who are against neoliberalism tend to use it as a smear. People who are neoliberal tend not to use the term at all. It's sort of like when the right talks about social Darwinism is a terrible thing. Nobody on the left uses the term. It's a term that mostly exists to smear people you disagree with. Neoliberal is a thing. It's much more a real practical definable thing in modern politics, but it's mostly people criticizing neoliberalism that use the term. So let's first try to figure out what it originally meant, and then we can think about how it's applied now. Neoliberal sort of means small l liberalism with a tendency to support free market capitalism. So I don't mean capital L liberalism, like the Liberal Party in the UK, or liberalism as progressivism, but I mean liberalism as the sort of 19th century laissez-faire liberalism, combined or modernized with some particular perspectives that include deregulation of businesses. The Reagan tax cuts were sort of part of more modern 20th century neoliberalism. More defense spending often is in line with modern neoliberalism. What else? Deregulation of the financial industry, deregulation of trucking and banking and airlines. So if we imagine liberalism as sort of a late 19th century movement, neoliberalism is the way in which it was restructured and updated starting sort of in the early 1970s. Economically, it's typically just interwoven with supply side economics, the sort of trickle down, tax cuts for the rich are good for everybody type of stuff. It's not just Republicans that are neoliberal or do neoliberal politics. Bill Clinton passing NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, that was a widely accepted neoliberal thing to do. But the sort of underlying ideas are privatization of things that should be or were public, deregulation, cutting government spending under the pretense of the debt, as we've talked about that political football, and turning over more and more of the economy to private companies. And that's where it kind of gets into foreign policy, because right now in the United States, when critics of neoliberalism talk about neoliberalism, they're often talking more about foreign policy than they are tax cuts. Although certainly, as I mentioned, supply side economics and tax cuts for the rich are part of the early neoliberal ideas of the 70s and 80s. The Iraq War and Afghanistan War came from neoliberal ideology, bringing order as we see it to other regions. The idea of spreading democracy, like, for example, as the 2003 Iraq War claimed to want to do in Iraq, that is a neoliberal idea. What makes this a little difficult is that there's actually a split within neoliberalism about interventionism. Generally speaking, neoliberalism is for foreign intervention, but it doesn't always mean military intervention. So a lot of the people on the right who are against military interventions in many cases, under sort of libertarian ideas, it doesn't mean they aren't neoliberal. They often just favor intervention via soft power, diplomacy, quiet support for coups, and sort of other geopolitical tactics that are out there. So there's not one definition of neoliberalism. Anytime that we have an ideology that is often defined by its opponents, we have to be sort of cognizant of the fact that that is a thing in thinking about what is part of it and what isn't part of it. But that's sort of a basic structure for what neoliberalism means in practice right now in the 21st century. Hey, David, you've spoken about whether people born outside the U.S. but naturalized as citizens should be allowed to run for president. What about age? Should there be a maximum age to run for president? Okay, so let's think this through. What's the principle at play behind minimum ages to run for president. The idea would be, as a society, we've decided that some people are too young to have the right combination of knowledge and life experience and maybe work experience or experience in the world to make good presidents. So a minimum age is established for being president of the United States. So what would be the idea of a maximum age? A couple different ways to think about it. One would be humans have a sort of limited lifespan currently, and we believe it's in the interests of society to have presidents that are not super close to what is typically the upper limit of the duration of a human life. We could make a sort of cognitive argument. We could say, well, studies show that once you get to 67, 68, 69, even without dementia, we're not talking about dementia, but there starts to be some degree of measurable cognitive decline in terms of not just physical things like reaction time, but the way that the mind responds to new ideas and information. And that's something that's regularly a part of being president of the United States. Or maybe the limited physical abilities that start to develop as we age are relevant in thinking about who should or shouldn't be president of the United States. So in general, people who want an upper age limit on presidents tend to talk about between 65 and 80, right? 65 would really be kind of on the low end. Others saying once you get to 80 years old, we should have a president who's younger than 80. The scientific argument to be made would be the first one I made, which is there is measurable cognitive decline, not dementia, but slower decisions, reduced ability to assimilate new information, less clear thinking, and in most people it becomes measurable around age 67, according to one study that I looked at. I don't think we need this, quite frankly. The campaign process itself is pretty grueling at this point. 18 months, 24 months, depending on how you want to measure it, of campaigning all over the country. A lot of problems would become clear between the rallies and the interviews and the traveling, whether they're cognitive or physical. However, it doesn't actually seem to stop people from winning, as we saw with Donald Trump, a guy who seems to be cognitively limited, if not as a result of decline. He might have just been that way his entire life. So I think that what we would be better off with, because remember, to create an upper limit for being eligible to be president, you would need to amend the Constitution, which sets out the minimum requirements to be president of the United States. That's very difficult to do. I think we just need more mandatory transparency in the same way that states can decide that in order to be on the ballot in their state, a presidential candidate needs to release their tax returns, something that Donald Trump didn't do. We could make it a requirement to release full health information, and that would get around these obviously bogus health reports about Trump, that he's just so healthy and not obese and would be the healthiest president in history, or whatever the case may be. Mandatory tax return disclosure, mandatory full health report disclosures, and then let the people decide. I don't think we need a maximum age in the law, and that would be much more difficult to achieve from a legal perspective. Let's make it mandatory that we actually get full health reports. And while we're at it, let's do the taxes as well, since we still are curious about that with the current president of the United States. Send me your thoughts. If you disagree and believe we do need a maximum age, tell me not only why, but how you would institute it. If you disagree with me that we don't even need more transparent health reporting about presidential candidates and presidents, tell me why. I want to hear from everybody disagreeing on all levels and from both sides. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Thanks for joining me. Get access to the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership, as well as patreon.com/davidpakmanshow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.